Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about all things vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you for listening. We really hope that the show is something you look forward to checking in with every week. Episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcasts to get you ready for working in the yard on the weekend. So make sure you subscribe. All you need to do is open the podcast app on your Apple iPhone and look for Gardening Utah, and you can just hit that subscribe button, and every time we drop a new episode, you'll be able to have a listen. Now, if you don't have an Apple iPhone, you can still listen to our episodes. You can listen on 860 KKAT AM on Saturday and Sunday in Utah, which you may be listening to right now. And you can also listen to past episodes on 860kkat.com/garden. So my hope is this is a fun and informative show that you can listen to while you're out and about, kind of getting to work in the garden, or maybe you're shopping in the nurseries or garden centers, so you can be inspired and stay in the know on all the tasks you need to accomplish. But first, it's the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is winterize your garden for wildlife. Now, as autumn turns to winter, which is just about to do, many of us, we're packing up our gardening tools, we're heading back inside, we're not paying as much attention to our gardens again until spring. But in the depths of winter, our gardens are bustling with life, and throughout winter, gardens across Utah continue to provide a lifeline for many of our native species, especially if we make a few easy adjustments that will make all the difference to the wildlife on our doorstep during the harsh, cold, freezing winter months. So a lot of the local wildlife does struggle to find food, water, and shelter during the winter. So listen, if you haven't perfectly manicured your yard for the winter, don't sweat it so much. There is a happy medium, and you can make your yard and garden a winter haven for all of these different critters with minimal effort. And taking a few simple steps now can really help a host of animals find plenty to eat and find some safe hiding places for the upcoming cold weather. So first of all, if you haven't cut down your plants, have a look at what you have, because the native plants really go far if you just let them go to seed and you refrain from cutting them down. That will allow the birds to enjoy the seeds, and even some different beneficial insects can burrow in the stems to provide protection through the winter. Now, for our birds, first of all, they definitely need some bird feeders stocked with nutritious suet and sunflower seeds, but of course in a protected area away from wind and away from predators, even cats. Birds need a reliable source in the winter as well, both for drinking and both for bathing. So if you don't live near a water source, a heated bird bath, which by the way are available all over right now with solar power, which is so fun. And it's a great item to help birds get through the winter. And feeding birds throughout the winter is really important because it increases their breeding success the following year. You just want to make sure that they're not completely reliant on it. And another great tip to provide shelter for small animals and birds and even butterflies, if you don't have a wood pile or something like that in your yard, you can gather leaves, sticks, and brush from around your yard, create a pile, and that will create a lot of shelter for small animals, birds, and even butterflies. So let's help our outdoor feathered friends throughout the winter. Give them a few places to hide, give them a place to get some water and some food, and hopefully we'll create a fun ecosystem for our natural wildlife to thrive during the winter. And that was the tip of the week.
Never miss a tip for your garden. Never miss a tip for your garden. And never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Okay, well, if you've listened to past episodes of our show, you would be hard-pressed to not have figured out that I love animals, whether it be our own domesticated animals that we have, or backyard chickens, or all the little birds in our yard. I just really love to take care of nature as much as possible, and it makes you feel so good. And I love bird watching so much, and I'm excited to say that in a very soon episode, we are going to have a bird watcher expert come on the show and talk to us all about the types of birds that we can be seeing in our yards in Utah over the winter, and even more tips and tricks, a lot more specifically about the type of bird and the thing we can do to take care of them, as far as like the type of food they even like to eat, and just different things we can do in our yards to attract the birds that are, needing food this time of year, and just really talk a lot about bird watching and everything, which is a huge passion of mine. And I haven't really got to talk about that too much yet here in Gardening Utah, because of course, I really like to stay very task focused on the things that we need to do during the time of year in the garden. And I'm actually looking really forward to these episodes coming up over the winter, where it's going to be a little bit more just topical around just things that, we really like to have a chat about, which of course is a huge part of the show. And that's one of the things I love, is keeping all of us on task to really make sure that we're tackling all the garden tasks that we need to do that week in the garden. But I also love to just deep dive into certain topics. So upcoming in the next couple weeks and over the next couple months, we're going to have shows on Christmas trees and how to, once you get the tree in your house, the best way to take care of it. We're going to be talking about citrus trees, not necessarily that we're going to have them in our homes, but we're going to talk a lot about citrus, and I'm really excited about that. We're going to talk about iris. We're going to talk about succulents. We're going to have shows about the Christmas bulbs, like the paper whites and the amaryllis, Christmas cactus. We're going to talk about house plants. So anyway, as you can tell, we have so many fun things coming up on Gardening Utah, and I'm really excited for you guys to be a part of it. So on today's show, we have Cameron Allcott with Progressive Plants, and we're really going to deep dive on a couple topics that are really being asked a ton right now. And one of them is what to do with your evergreen trees out in the garden. Cameron gives us one of the best analogies I've ever heard around how to know if your evergreen tree needs water this time of year or not. And I did talk about that in a past episode, but trust me, he really gives us some really good information on why it's important to pay attention to that. We're going to talk about why we used to have plenty of time to plant your trees or shrubs or anything else really that you are going to need to plant. We're getting a lot of questions about, hey, I still have a rose of Sharon that's just in the pot. Can I get it in the ground? We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about a friend that we just lost in the garden business, Grant Holdaway. We're going to pay some respects to him, and Cameron's going to tell you a little bit about him. And we're also going to talk about kale and other plants and vegetables that Cameron is growing hydroponically at progressiveplants.com. I'm really excited for you to hear more about that, because it was really inspiring on just healthy, fresh vegetables that you can even get this time of year in Utah. And we're going to answer a lot of winter garden questions that we've received on the Utah Gardeners Facebook page. So stay with us. We'll be right back after this break, right here on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me here today is Cameron Allcott with progressiveplants.com. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing, Jana?
I'm hanging in there. It has been quite the month here in Utah, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh, it's been really interesting for sure. We've had summer, then winter, then summer, and then I think we had like a day's worth of fall.
Yeah, totally. It's been so weird. So I noticed the other day you were posting on Utah Gardeners about all of your super cool vegetables that you're growing there, and I really wanted you to tell everybody about that.
Oh, the hydroponics experiment.
Yes, tell us about this. I must know.
Well, a couple of years ago, we teamed up with a couple of people. We were actually doing aquaponics, where we actually had fish involved. And just through the culmination of things, we just kind of like scaled it down to hydroponics. And one of the things that we've always kind of felt passionate about here, and I have to give a lot of credit to my mother on this one, because this is something that she's extremely passionate about is being able to feed people. And so we're trying to find new and better or off-season ways to actually grow like high quality food, and be able to, get access for people to do it. So, I mean, currently as we're trying to figure out like our programs and everything like that, everything we're growing right now is just kind of going to the Utah Food Bank. So because I mean, we're experimenting and we just don't want that food to go to waste, so we just are kind of donating and stuff. And
Yeah.
actually, very recently, we actually put it up on our website for sale. So we actually have a category on our website at progressiveplants.com for hydroponic vegetables. And as of the timing of this recording, basically all I have is like different types of chard and kale.
Okay.
But we are actually doing some cool things like with blueberries. We have plans to do some dragon fruit, some citrus, tomatoes, cucumbers. We've got some peppers that are on the way. So we're actually going to have like these really kind of like colorful type, like veggie baskets essentially, or like, box of vegetables that you can harvest or at least enjoy like, good quality food in the middle of winter, obviously. But the funny thing is that as we are getting better at growing this stuff, I'm starting to actually prefer the hydroponic veggies than the stuff that I grow in the ground.
Oh, you're kidding.
So no, not at all. Like the kale that we grow and the chard that we grow is better than anything that I've ever had out of the ground.
Really?
By a long shot.
Do you think it's because of the health of the root system? I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, I think, being grown hydroponically, there's a lot more moisture in the leaves, obviously, because it's always in water.
True.
So it's, they're crunchier, they're firmer, they're sweeter. Because a lot of people complain about kale being like a little bit too bitter, especially if it ends up drying out or it gets really hot. But because we're keeping these at like the perfect temperatures all the time, and Matt, who is leading up the whole thing, you should actually have him on your show because he knows aquaponics like the back of his hand. Like he can answer all of your technical questions about everything, how to do it, like the nutrient, the ratios, and all that type of stuff. That's what he's really, really good at. And like whatever magic that he's dialed in has made this stuff just absolutely scrumptious. So I've been taking stuff home. Like my girlfriend's kids love to make kale chips. And so I posted one of their recipes like on our Progressive Plants Facebook page. And it's no joke. It's really good. He'll throw the air fryer, salt them up, and he has his own little recipe that he does. And he just like eats them by the thousands. So,
oh, word. Yum.
Yeah. So it's a really fun way to teach kids about, different ways of growing things, but, also cooking very simple recipes. So I like it. I mean, it's kind of fun. Like I said, we just, it's a passion of ours. We have all this land out here in where we grow all these things. And in the winter, it's like, well, we could be doing something else.
Yeah.
So, we just kind of like adapted the old aquaponic systems and turned them into hydroponic systems. And so now we're actually just making that stuff available to the public and just trying to find different things to grow and even just get some weird things that are kind of hard to find and see if we can grow those, hydroponically. So.
Absolutely. Well, and the other neat thing is that as you were talking about all the different vegetables that you're starting, like the tomatoes and the peppers and stuff, is that produce just bottom line lasts so much longer when it doesn't go through that giant shipping process. And the fact that this is locally grown is such a cool concept. I love it.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because a couple of weeks ago, we'd harvested our first batch of kale and chard, and there was something else in there that I don't quite remember what. And then we put it here in the fridge in the office, like in our lunchroom, and then we forgot about it. But the funny thing is that when we opened it up again, I was like, "What's in this bag?" I opened up the bag, and actually everything was like 90% still fresh. And I was kind of blown away by that. I was like, "Wait a minute, this is like 3 weeks old in the fridge." Like I can barely get stuff to last 3 days if I go and buy it from the grocery store.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And so I pulled it out, and there was like a few pieces that had like a little bit of mold on it, but really like the plants themselves looked pristine. It looked like I just barely kind of pulled them out of the hydroponics. I was like, dang, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So Yeah,
Yeah,
it just keeps a lot longer. So, I mean, with the stuff that I brought home, I mean, it lasted about what, week and a half
yeah,
before I felt like I had to get rid of it.
yeah,
So,
totally. I also, if I do buy kale in the store, I like to chop off the bottoms and put them in just a glass of water. It seems to work really good, at least to freshen
yeah.
it up at first, and then, of course, putting it in the fridge. But you know what I did with a whole bunch of excess kale, just while we're talking about kale? I did this random thing with a whole bunch of excess kale that I had last year. I dried it all in the oven, just like with kale chips, like it's a similar process, I'm sure. And
Mhm.
then I put it all in the blender and I just blended it up into powder. And then I was adding the powder over the winter to like green smoothies and stuff all year long.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. See, because like kale for me is like one of my favorite veggies. I've always liked the flavor of it. And some people like hate it. It's like, it seems like it's one of like those love-hate vegetables.
Yeah,
Um, I've always really liked them. You
yeah.
know, that's just me. And so the first time that I had kale chips, I was like, sold.
Kale chips are delicious. I'm telling you, I love them too.
Oh, yeah, and if you season them correctly, I mean, it's great. So, like, so my girlfriend's, her two youngest kids, they have like these little like bake-offs and like little recipe contests and stuff of like different ways to prepare kale chips. So
Oh, that's
it's
fun.
really cute.
I use kale and chard in my soups all the time. I make
Hmm.
that Olive Garden. Maybe I should post it if people want to see it. DM me on Instagram at Gardening Utah, and I'll give you the recipe. But it's that Olive Garden copycat of the Zuppa Toscana,
Hmm.
and it
Oh,
calls for
wow.
a whole bunch of kale that you dump in at the very end, and that's the green in that soup.
Yeah, I like it with my breakfast. So I'll do like a lot of like scrambled eggs and different variations of that. Because I like my dishes to be like really colorful. So
Yeah.
I'll do like the different colored peppers, kale, you know, throw some cheese in there, onions, garlic sometimes. Wait, did I put garlic in the lessons? Yes, I did, and it was
Mhm.
good. The cumin. I mean, I'll just do like all sorts of stuff in there, and
Oh my
it's
god.
so good.
Okay, so you're speaking my language here because earlier you mentioned that you really liked, or you guys were looking into planting some rare varieties, and that is like my whole jam because I love to grow things that no one else, that my neighbors don't have, and I don't mean like rare vegetables as much as just different varieties that you can't find anywhere else, and then experiment. It's my number one favorite thing to do with gardening. So,
Hmm.
I mean, what? Give me the scoop. Is there like, have you guys already started some rare varieties that you can brag about?
Um, we've started some blueberries. I'm trying to remember what else that he put in there. A lot of what Matt likes to do, I mean, he'll do like lettuce, for instance, but
Yeah.
not like regular romaine lettuce. He's
Yeah.
going to get like the weird, funky ones. And, you know, unfortunately, because like I deal so much with like ornamental plants, I'm really, really bad at edible ones because it's
Yeah.
never really been my main focus. But Matt likes to get really strange varieties of things that are just kind of like off the beaten path, but
Yeah.
they're still really good. I mean, there's some sort of lettuce that he has down there. I can't remember what it is. It has red speckles. Maybe it's like red freckle lettuce. I don't remember. I'm sorry. But I mean, it's really good.
Yeah.
And the butter crunch lettuce that I remember growing through in the aquaponics was sublime. Like it was amazing.
Oh,
So yeah, I'm really excited to see where this goes, you know, and the best part about it for me, because, you know, we talked about this before. I mean, I like to like help people like learn and grow and do things because I think it makes us better people if we try to grow more either food or plants or just whatever. If you're growing and caring for something, I think it makes you a better person. And
absolutely.
so I get really excited when we're utilizing our greenhouse during in the off months for things like food, you know. And if people want to buy it, you know, that's great. You know, if you know, we end up just, you know, giving it to the Utah Food Bank, that's fine too. You
Yeah.
know, if we're doing something with it and somebody's enjoying it somewhere, that's all that I can ask. So
Absolutely. Yeah, this year I grew a whole bunch of really rare varieties of peppers, and I'm making some of the most fun, like seasoning salts and stuff with them now, with what's left, of course, from the last harvest. But it's just so fun to grow things that you know, even if it's the same variety but just a different color, or like you said with the lettuce, just the little purple fleck or something. It makes it so interesting.
yeah, that's I kind of had a chuckle to myself the other day because I mean, there was a post that I saw on the Utah Gardeners Facebook group, And somebody was saying like, I'm so sad that I'm not going to get like any lettuce or greens anymore, because it's like in the middle of October, it's just frozen. I think I actually read that while I was in the greenhouse, and I was like, oh, wow, look at all this kale and chard and lettuce that I have growing right now.
Oh my gosh. I'll have to look for that post. That's so funny because you always have like such a witty way of responding to people's questions anyway, but the fact that you were literally standing in a room in a greenhouse filled with fresh vegetables that weren't going to freeze over the winter is quite funny.
Nope.
Yeah. I love that. Well, speaking of the Utah Gardener Group, we earlier today when some of these questions came about, we've had a lot of questions, the last couple of days that just fascinate me, and I love to see what other people in Utah are thinking about at certain times of the year. So we're going to talk after this break more about some of the questions that have come up and get into more detail about some of these, because I think that, if one person has a question, there's 100 other people wondering the exact same thing. Especially you'll notice when people say, oh, following this post, or I'm more curious too. And as much as you and I think that when we know the information, we think, well, nobody needs to hear that again, but they do. And so we're going to get into some of this and elaborate on people's questions right after this on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time.
We are supported by ProgressivePlant.com. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to ProgressivePlant.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit ProgressivePlant.com today.
She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me in studio today is Cameron Allcott with ProgressivePlants.com, and we're talking gardening. We're specifically in this segment going to tackle a few of the questions that have come across in the Utah Gardeners Group, and there was one that fascinated me that just happened right before we started recording today, and this was from Julie. And she said, I'm looking at the Arbor Day Foundation website to order ponderosa pine trees, and it says they can't deliver to Utah. Does anybody know why? I've looked at several other pine trees, and it's the same answer. So let's talk about that.
Okay. Because she was looking for ponderosa pine, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's the deal is the Utah Department of Agriculture has very strict protocols of plants that can be shipped into into Utah, which I am actually very glad and thankful for, because there's a lot of pests that are in other states that if they ever got here would do a tremendous amount of damage. So like, for instance, Japanese beetle, like we've all kind of heard about that. It is endemic east of the Rockies. So the second that you get into Denver and go east of here, they are everywhere. Some places are worse than others. I have visited some nurseries in Minnesota and Michigan where Japanese beetle populations are really high, and they literally devour roses, just the petals. So you can grow these fabulous rose bushes without any flowers.
Oh, man.
They will absolutely demolish them. The other thing that I have seen with them is that they will skeletize leaves from about 3 feet above the ground up. So I've seen linden trees in Minnesota, and linden trees are really common here. I mean, they're everywhere. They've been here for decades. And they look like little brown skeleton leaves on all of the lindens. And the funny thing about a Japanese beetle is that they have like this flight path of about 3 feet off the ground, and they're dumb little bugs. They're not like really intelligent. They just kind of like fly around, and then they bump into something, they land on it, and then they start eating, and then they go straight up.
Interesting.
So you'll find a lot of these shrubs and trees that have these gorgeous leaves below 3 feet, but they are horrific above 3 feet. It is the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. And so like a lot of the really big nurseries in Minnesota, When you go and you look at their fields, they are green, from the top. Then you get really close, but they're all sticks from about 3 feet up. So it's kind of interesting how that works. So that's the reason why we can't get a lot of plants from different states. I think, like for me, for instance, I can really only import from California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and I think I could do a little bit from Arizona.
Yeah.
Any other state I cannot import from.
That makes sense. All. That makes so much sense. Well, hopefully that answers Jessica's question there, because I just thought that was so interesting. And again, there was so much comments on that that it was obviously interesting and informative to so many other people too. So.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the Utah Department of Agriculture, they've really kind of set the standard of what other agriculture departments in other states of how they deal with pests. So like, I know the Idaho Department of Agriculture is working with the Utah Department of Agriculture to deal with their Japanese beetle problem, because they have some localized populations in there that they are trying to get rid of, and I think in like a Meridian and Boise. And because of the success that Utah's had in eradicating Japanese beetle populations here, they are now having success over in Idaho, and they're actually dealing with it over in Oregon as well.
Yeah.
So Oregon has a little bit of a bigger problem because they are a nursery producing state. So they literally out of Oregon, they literally produce plants that go all over the country. So if Japanese beetle gets like really loose in Oregon, then we're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So we have a question here about wrapping tree trunks. What is your opinion on that?
It depends a little bit on the tree. You have some trees that are here in Utah that don't really like our mad temperature swings that we kind of had a couple of weeks ago. Fruit trees, like apples especially, and even like crab apples, and some ornamental trees like maples have a very thin bark. So they can sometimes really react poorly to the wild temperature swings that we have, especially when we've been really warm. So when we went from like 70 to 20 or whatever it was a couple of weeks ago, that can wreak havoc, because the trees are still moving a lot of fluid in their cambium layer. And because their bark is so thin, sometimes if it freezes fast enough and there's still enough moisture in there, it can it'll explode the cell walls of the cambium, and you'll get like what's called like a bark split. You'll see this a lot of times on the south or southwest sides of trunks a lot of times. So with some trees, especially young ones, I would actually recommend that maybe you wrap them up a little bit to kind of ease that whole freeze thaw thing when the sun hits it. So especially on your maples, especially on fruit trees, just get some burlap, wrap it up, and then you'll have to do that for a couple of years until the trees really get established and get some caliper on them. But that's a really good way to protect your trees over the winter.
So a couple layers of burlap, like how many times do you wrap it tightly or just loose, and how many?
No, don't wrap it too tight. Just keep it loose, because the only thing you're really trying to do is to keep the freeze thaw from really happening. That the thaw is going to happen when the sun's hitting the trunk, because it just collects all that radiating heat. If you can have at least the burlap there to kind of disperse that heat a little bit, so that the sun's heat isn't necessarily reaching the trunk, you'll be a lot better off. So if you can wrap it a couple times around, that'll help out immensely.
Okay. Now, speaking of wrapping plants, right before this next break, we have a question from Catherine, and she says, what winter protection do I need for my Floribunda roses and her David Austin Abraham Darbies?
Generally, just leave roses alone. I typically do not touch roses unless they have like dead branches or something in them. Just leave them until spring. That you'll want to really just kind of prune those. Middle of March, typically, if you're in northern Utah, depending on exactly where you're at. But roses are kind of like semi-active in the cold months, and if you prune now, you're actually like sending them mixed messages, because when you prune, you're stimulating growth, which is what you don't want your rose to do at this time of year.
Exactly. I was driving up my road the other day, and I saw a guy pruning his roses, and I just wanted to yell out the window, no! Don't do it! Anyway.
I do that all the time. I see people cutting their plants, and I'm just like, no, woody stems, leave them till spring.
I know. Okay, we'll be right back with more of your questions right here on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, with Cameron Allcott from progressiveplants.com. And we're talking garden and answering all the questions that we've seen that are very, very interesting on the Utah Gardeners Facebook page. And Cameron, we have an interesting one here that asks about her Rose of Sharon. She's got one in a pot. And Devin asks, is it too late to plant the potted Rose of Sharon?
No, stick it in the ground, like now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so contrary to popular belief, generally speaking, winters are kind of hard on plants, but that's not really what hurts plants in the year. It's actually our summers. So if you have a new plant, I mean, the more time that you have it in the ground before next summer, it has all that time for its roots to get established, and it will perform so much better for you next year if you can get it in the ground, because it has 6 months before we get really hot again. Your plant will thank you later if you plant it now rather than the spring. Spring, I know a lot of people love to go plant in the spring, but you only have about maybe 2 or 3 months of actual growth to try to get it established before the heat hits. And then you're fighting with trying to keep things hydrated. If you can plant now, roots are still growing. Roots actually grow all winter, just really, really slowly. So when they leaf out next spring, you already have that much more of a head start for the summer. So they're a lot easier to deal with, where you don't have to check them every 3 hours to make sure they're alive.
And I think that's quite honestly, since starting this podcast, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I find, is because I think there's this, as all the nurseries and garden centers start stocking in the spring, that's really only because that's when, all the flowers and the annuals are really, really it's time to plant those. And that's just kind of when everyone's in the mood to get outside, but it really doesn't have anything to do with it being a better time to plant your ornamentals.
Correct. There's really only a few things that I can think of that don't like to get planted late in the season. Arbovitas, I guess, would probably be the main one that I think of. I've never seen those really do really well if they're planted late into the season. Sometimes your warm season grasses like miscanthus or your pennisetum, so like maiden grass and fountain grass. Sometimes they don't like to get planted really late, but I think that's mostly because they get dehydrated. Because when you plant late in the season, you actually do have to water longer into the season. I know a lot of people turn off their sprinklers around October 15th, but if you have a first year planting, you want to keep watering, especially if we don't have snow. So between October 15th and where we are now, we've had one snowstorm.
Yeah.
That may not be enough for a new planting. So, bust out the hose, water it by hand. You only have to do it maybe once every 1 or 2 weeks, depending on the temperatures outside. Yep. But if we're in the 50s and 60s, you still need to water just a little bit, even if they don't have any leaves on them. But your evergreens, anything that's evergreen is still active. It's still photosynthesizing. So they still need water right now, up until when we get just a boatload of snow. Sometimes even if we get a boatload of snow, you still need to go and supplementally water. Especially if we're cold, because even though if it's, we have 4 feet of snow outside, but it's only 20 degrees, that means all of the water, especially the top couple layers of the soil, is frozen. And I used this analogy the other day. It's you can't really suck an ice cube through a straw. And that's essentially what plant roots are trying to do. If the water is frozen, it cannot take up the water in that form. It has to be in a liquid. So you have to sometimes water supplementally, even in the middle of winter with your evergreens.
I love that analogy, because everyone thinks, why in the world would I water? There's so much snow. It's got plenty of water, and it's not true.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm remembering that. I love that analogy so much. I'm going to bring that
That's
up.
That's what I do. I think of analogies all the time, and 90% of the time they don't make sense, but
No, most of the time they do, and most of the time they're quite witty and funny as well. Mostly off of the air, though.
I know. I have to be careful with what I say on the air.
We both do, yeah. P.S. Cameron's a really funny guy, everybody. Okay. No. Okay, so let's talk about one of these listeners asked about junipers. They've got a big juniper tree that's kind of blocking a window, and it looks like they just recently moved into this house. They're wondering if now is a good time to let it go or if it matters.
If you're going to go off and kill something, it doesn't really matter when you kill it. A lot of times the junipers, depending on how big it is, they can have some gnarly root systems. So it may, you may well have to deal with it when the ground is still workable, so it still needs to be warm. But you may even need to get a stump grinder out there because, those juniper roots are gnarly.
Brutal.
So, but yeah, if you can tear stuff out whenever you feel like tearing stuff out. I do it all the time.
Yeah, for the most part. If it were me, my advice would be if it doesn't matter to you, there's really not, like Cameron mentioned, there's really not an ideal time to pull it out. So I would just wait maybe until the spring to let the whatever critters overwinter, birds and whatever beneficial insects and that kind of a thing if they hang out in junipers.
What is that analogy? Like, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
Exactly.
And then
there's another.
So now it's the best time to pull out a shrub is you shouldn't have planted it in the first place.
Unless you got smart advice from someone at progressiveplants.com, correct?
Yeah, I hate most junipers, so I don't blame her for trying to tear it out. It's a new home for her. Great, kudos to her for tearing that thing out.
Yeah, that's smell true. Yeah, I like juniper when they're small.
Smelled like cat urine.
Although, doesn't junipers make gin? Doesn't the juniper berry make gin?
Yes, they do. I think they use juniper berries to make gin. I don't know which juniper it is, but
yeah, I'm sure it's not the ones that we grow in our backyard. But
who knows? I've never really tried to make a whole lot of alcoholic drinks in my day, so
not from scratch.
I've had some things that I forgot about in the fridge, and I'm sure that they were fermenting and alcoholic, but I didn't try it.
There you go. All right, so this is a hot topic this time of year. When you're walking into a nursery or quite often grocery stores this time of year, you'll see all kinds of different mini Christmas trees is what you think they are. And I'm not talking about the ones that are cut down for us to decorate. I'm talking about the ones that that are in pots. And some of these are meant for our climate, but most of them aren't, depending on the variety. So one of them, I think, is your favorite tree, aside from the flowering pear.
My least favorite tree.
Yeah.
It's so I guess we're talking about the dwarf Alberta spruce.
Oh, yes, we are.
What's really funny is, nothing says 1940s like a dwarf Alberta spruce. So, they used to be sold with reckless abandon here, and it's funny because if you go up to Oregon, you'll go to every nursery, and every nursery up there has tens of thousands of them because they're really popular in different areas of the country. In Utah, they've really kind of dropped off as far as popularity goes. I think we bring in maybe 10 a year.
Really?
At this point. And what's really kind of funny is that they're actually just a witch's broomed version of the regular Norway spruce that gets 80 feet tall.
Okay.
Now, what's funny about a witch's broom is that usually a witch's broom is some sort of infection, whether it's viral, bacterial, or fungal or something that causes it to stay dense and compact the way that it is. But as I've noticed over the last several decades is that sometimes those dwarf Alberta spruce fight off that infection and then resume growing like a regular Alberta spruce.
Oh, wow.
Or regular Norway spruce.
Right.
So, yeah, they can get really, really big. There's a whole bunch along Highland Drive that I've noticed that have started to revert. So instead of being that cute little conical type thing that only gets 6 feet tall, they're now pushing 10 to 12 to 15 feet tall. So,
oh my word.
Yeah, but they're really, really cute, and you can plant them in your yard.
Tell us how you really feel, Cameron.
Yeah.
Well,
They are a spider mite magnet, if that helps at all.
yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, look, the dwarf Alberta spruce is one of the ones we are talking about, obviously, and that will grow in Utah. And I actually have one in a pot that I just like to put little Christmas lights around and have on my patio because it looks like a mini Christmas tree at Christmas time. And so that's fine and dandy. But yeah, in the landscape, they're not as, they kind of get to a certain size and they get filled with spider mites and they're just not as sought after in Utah, but they will grow. But there are a lot of them that do not, that they'll sell in the grocery stores. I think, I've seen a lot of like, I just know that they're meant for Oregon, right? Like cedars, and I'm trying to even remember the names of some of the other ones, but you really need to look at the name of what it is on the tag before you go and put it on your patio this time of year, right?
Yeah, I generally speaking, if I don't know what it is, it doesn't grow here.
Yeah.
That's like my curse of being in this industry for so long, is that like I'm always exposed to a lot of plants, but the flip side, when I see something that I've never heard of before, it's usually pretty rare that it actually grows here. So,
yes.
And we've never really been into the Christmas game, so I'm not even really sure what gets sold because I've never been super festive. So,
yeah. Okay, here's another question here. We've got someone asking similar question as earlier. Maggie asks, I know it's beyond late, but I was hoping to get some pansies. Has anyone seen any for sale recently?
Strangely enough, if you go to progressiveplants.com and search up pansy in the search feature, I actually have a whole bunch of, I think they're the majestic giant mix, and they're huge. They're gorgeous. And you can plant those now and enjoy them, and they'll come back for you in the spring too. So pansies are a biennial, so they should live 2 years. I know the summers here sometimes will kill them off because it's going to be so hot and so dry, but if you plant them in the fall, you'll get them first thing in the spring, and you should get some blooms through the winter a little bit too. They like it pretty cold.
They really do, and I think it's yet another misconception. You see so many pansies for sale in nurseries in the spring, and you think that's the best time to plant that variety, but it's really not. If you plant them now, they're going to come back with force next spring.
Yeah, they do a lot better over winter than they do over the summer here for sure.
Yep. Okay, last topic before the show is over. We lost a friend in the garden business.
We did. Grant Holdaway. He was in Vineyard. He had a company, his business called Grant's Plants, and then I believe he renamed it to like the Vineyard Garden Center at some point. He was 89, I think is how old he was. He is a legend in the nursery business. He was down there, like in Vineyard, like I said, and he helped a lot of people learn and, grew a lot of vegetables and instilled a lot of passion in a lot of people down there. And then it's always sad to me when we lose somebody who's just a titan in the industry, especially here locally. So, but I wanted to give him some recognition because he's done so much to influence, gardening and ornamental horticulture, stuff like that here in Utah. So it's just a sad day that he's passed,
Absolutely. Well, what I'll do is I'll put his memoriam in a link in our episode notes. So if any listener wants to read up about him, they absolutely can. And our thoughts and our hearts go out to his family. Okay, well, thanks so much for being here, Cameron. This has been really fun to have you. I can't wait to have you back on the show again soon.
Oh, you know how I love coming onto your show.
That's right. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Gardening Utah. Thank you so much to Cameron Allcott with ProgressivePlants.com for always being such a great friend of the show. Shout out to our producer, Lambo, and shout out to you for listening. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next week here on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah. Available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/gardening.
We are supported by progressiveplant.com. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to progressiveplant.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit progressiveplant.com today.